And the earliest funders of Palantir were Thiel himself, but also the CIA's In-Q-Tel. And the CIA
Always.
was Palantir's first client. And so I find it an immensely concerning company, particularly its interest in predictive policing and pre-crime. Essentially, it would comb all of the data off of your smartphone and put it into its pre-crime
Oh my God.
analytics.
Whitney Webb just exposed the sinister truth about Palantir's plans to enslave Americans. And in this clip, she gets into Palantir's long and close history with the CIA, what Palantir's doing to expand mass surveillance and even engage in pre-crime schemes, and why it's become so well connected to the federal government. So let's get right into this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
And so I fear that because of the increased power of an entity like Palantir in the US government now, that the next shoe to drop there will be a huge push for pre-crime, predictive policing, as discussed earlier. And Trump nearly fell for that trap in 2019 when there was a spate of mass shootings. So William Barr, who was then Attorney General, it got barely any media coverage, but he created the legal infrastructure for pre-crime in the United States through a program called DEEP. And then after that,
explain
Trump
this.
said that
Explain
we needed to,
for anybody who doesn't know what that is. Explain it.
DEEP is an acronym. I forget exactly what it stands for, but it's like deterring. It's something about deterrence through early detection or something like that. But basically, the legal infrastructure set up by Bill Barr there was that you could ostensibly arrest someone before they committed a crime preemptively. And there have been only a handful of arrests through DEEP via my understanding. But because it's there, anything could happen that could make it be deployed at scale. And so that was particularly concerning at the time, because after that, because of the outrage about the spate of shootings at the time that I think began with the El Paso Walmart shooting of that year, Trump said that social media platforms need to develop tools where they look at what users are saying and determine who will be a shooter before they can commit an act of violence. I'm paraphrasing there.
Just think about this. This is the plot of Minority Report, that Tom Cruise movie that we all, enjoyed as entertainment, thinking like this is some far off future that goes awry. Well, that's what the feds are trying to implement with their collaboration with Palantir. And people will look at this interview and say, Whitney, you're just a wacky conspiracy theorist. But this is so well documented. Thanks for friends of mine like at the Free Thought Project. This is a fantastic article showing that this is not a conspiracy theory that's bogus. This is actually true, and they are conspiring to do this. This pre-crime program was actually piloted in New Orleans in 2018. This leaked out into the media. It didn't get that much coverage, but it was known that the New Orleans Police Department went to extraordinary lengths to keep its relationship with Palantir secret from the public. And Palantir, for its first years, only had the CIA as a client, and it was a child of the CIA. So, this would be looked at like you're just a zany freak to bring this up, but what Whitney is saying is actually widely documented. It's just being ignored. And it's being ignored by right-wingers right now because Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance are so connected to this administration, obviously in the latter, but the former as well.
And then his administration was considering but did not implement a health-focused version of the Pentagon's DARPA. They were calling it HARPA, and that the pilot program of the proposed HARPA would be another acronym, and I'm sorry that I don't remember what it stands for, but it's quite long. It's called Safe Homes, and the biggest lobbyists of this to the president at the time were Jared Kushner and his daughter Ivanka, and basically what that program proposed was for an AI to go over all of Americans' social media posts and determine what they called early warning signs of neuropsychiatric violence. And if a user's profile was flagged, all sorts of things could be triaged from that, including, court-ordered physician appointments and all sorts of things that sound terrible. Trump, according to the Washington Post, liked the idea, but he ultimately didn't pass it. So you can take the Post reporting however you want, I guess. But what did happen? The Biden administration did create HARPA, but they created it under another name. They called it ARPA-H, and they framed it as this is how we're going to cure cancer. But a lot of the same programs are still there. The same architects of that HARPA proposed to Trump for those purposes in 2019 were also involved in the creation of ARPA-H.
Yeah, of course. Just like almost everything that deprives us of our rights and our liberty and launches wars and compounds the debt, creates inflation, this is a bipartisan phenomenon. So clearly is, but it's so tied to Trump and his administration from his support from Thiel and from J.D. Vance, who is a child of Thiel, who Thiel was essentially the mentor of J.D. Vance, and in many ways his career was very astroturfed. For this to not get major coverage really shows the state of affairs when it comes to journalism, where only people in the independent media are really covering this to its due, extent. Because this is a major topic, man. This is far beyond what the NSA can do with its mass surveillance and Palantir's programs to engage in genomic scanning and creating AI weapons. It's far more than just pre-crime. But yeah, this is one of the most, apprehensive things about it that just fills me with trepidations as someone that doesn't want the surveillance state and these pre-crime schemes to unfold and take hold and then become precedent to eradicate our due process. It's insane.
Which has been pushing for, people to wear wearables, for example, which are, you could theoretically use as surveillance devices, but you wear them on your body, right? And they might, Palantir runs a lot of that same data as well. And if they were ever to combine and end the silo between healthcare and law enforcement, since they contract to both, there is a potential for very, very Orwellian, terrifying stuff when it comes to predictive policing and predictive analytics. It again depends on who is around the president and how much he listens to them. But I think it's since that happened in 2019, there was an attempt to get him to implement that program then. And if there is a big enough event again that could lead to huge calls to do something, we could see that be marketed as the quote unquote solution.
Always. That's always what happens. You take a tragedy that government caused in many cases and then apply more government solutions to that problem to compound it, not solve it, and to rob people of their liberty in the process. This is exactly what happened after 9/11, where we were robbed of our liberties. The Patriot Act was passed, the TSA was passed, shredding the Fourth Amendment, the surveillance state was expanded. We got, endless wars, 20-year occupations of Afghanistan and Iraq. The same thing happened after the COVID regime. This is a serious threat, and she's totally right. Again, this is being used now in major police departments like in New York and Chicago, where Palantir technology is being used for predictive policing. This is not just some bogus theory. This is well documented based on proof, evidence, and some reporting, but not enough, obviously.
And who wins there? Well, the big tech oligarchs that control all of the infrastructure that would be behind pre-crime and the AI algorithms. And what's troubling too about the war on domestic terror is that the definition for it, the government's definition for it across administrations is incredibly vague. So one example is that you can be defined a domestic terrorist if you feel like you have to stand up against perceived government overreach is the term. So that could very easily be anyone on either side of the political aisle. Yeah. So again, when we want to suspend civil liberties and constitutional rights for just one segment of the population because we're told it's necessary so that we can feel safer, what ultimately happens historically is that those rights go away for everybody. Except the people at the very, very, very top.
Every single time. How can you take what happened after 9/11 and the surveillance state and targeting terrorists and not say that then went against conservatives, deeming them as terrorists, insurrectionists at January 6th, the Whitmer entrapment scheme, all these things to brand them domestic terrorists after you laid the groundwork saying that this is only going to apply to Muslim extremists. That's exactly what happened. She's totally right here. And this happens on both sides. I mean, any kind of dystopian scheme like this, tyrannical scheme, to really stick it to your adversaries, always bites you in the back. And I'm not talking about punishing evildoers. That needs to happen. That needs to happen in Russiagate far more than James Comey, if you ask me. And who knows if he's actually going to be convicted of that. But this is a serious issue that Americans should pay more attention to.
That are controlling these systems.
For anybody who doesn't know what Palantir is, who's running it, why it's so dangerous, will you take us down that road?
Sure, I would be happy to. So my work on Palantir argues that it was an effort to privatize this program that was pushed on the public after 9/11 that was called Total Information Awareness, that was also housed in the Pentagon's DARPA. There was a huge outcry about this program at the time because it was, I would argue, rightly described as eliminating the constitutional right to privacy, because everyone's data was being sucked in and everyone's data was being spied on. And the ultimate goal of TIA, Total Information Awareness, was to have a pre-crime system in the United States that would stop, they said at first, terrorist attacks before they could happen. But they're not just looking at terrorists, they were looking at everybody. So obviously it was moving towards predicting crime before it happens. And it also had a health component where they said they would hopefully predict bioterror attacks before they happen. This is again during the the aftermath of the anthrax attacks of 2001, but also that they would predict pandemics before they happen. And a lot of that renewed interest in that, you could say, occurred during the COVID era, right? And so as this program was getting into trouble and they tried to change their name and tried to do all these things to keep Congress from defunding them, Palantir was incorporated by Peter Thiel. And Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, who were two of the Palantir co-founders, talked to Richard Pearl, who put them in touch with the person who was running Total Information Awareness. And they basically said, they viewed him as John Poindexter was his name. They viewed him as the godfather of modern surveillance, and they wanted to essentially recreate what he was doing. But they did so as an entirely private entity. And in doing so, because the government wasn't directly involved, a lot of the outcry just dissipated.
That's exactly how they forced this down our throats. They privatized it so they can get away of accusations of violating our rights by doing it through government. This is, the fascist merger of corporate and state power together to do things that are nefarious to Americans. But that doesn't really privatize it when the state is giving it such subsidies, giving it such monopolies, and having the CIA and FBI and NSA be its clients. And again, people will say Whitney is a conspiracy theorist on this, but again, let's look at James Corbett's article on Free Thought Project. He talks about that this DARPA program, TIA, was going to seek, collect, and analyze all transaction, communication, and travel data for every single person in the world and aggregate it into a singular database, robbing us of our persons and effects. The thing that, the Fourth Amendment is supposed to safeguard, they're throwing it in the waste bin. And we do know, about the initial funding of Palantir. This is back from an article in 2013 talking about how Palantir received $2 million of its seed funding from the CIA, and the CIA remained its only client for, I think, 6 years. I mean, this is the truth about Palantir. It's something that is very inconvenient, especially from conservatives that wanted to drain the swamp, and now they're saying nothing about Palantir. It's not exactly getting good coverage, but there's a good idea as to why that Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance are so closely tied into this. And by the way, Richard Pearl, who she mentioned, it's a small world. He's a predominant neocon that created and helped foster the Project for a New American Century, from which David Wurmser and Paul Wolfowitz and others propagandized for nation building after the Follow the Soviet Union in the unipolar era. Richard Pearl actually wrote the clean break memo that we reference often here, showing again what a small world this is of oligarchs trying to control us, start wars, and empire build.
And the earliest funders of Palantir were Thiel himself, but also the CIA's In-Q-Tel. And the CIA was Palantir's first client and was their only client, I believe, for their first 5 or 6 years as a company. Alex Karp has said the CIA was always the intended client of Palantir. You had Palantir engineers going to CIA headquarters every 2 weeks, having them tweak their product. It appears to be, I would argue, a CIA front company. And the CIA, particularly its chief information officer at the time, a fellow named Alan Wade, had also been one of the biggest cheerleaders of total information awareness. And he was also apparently a business partner of Ghislaine Maxwell's sister, Christine Maxwell. They tried to make a Homeland Security software program together.
They all tie into each other. Isn't that ludicrous that we have the Epstein thing here, the neocon thing, the fake libertarian Peter Thiel thing here? You know, creating this scheme in Palantir funded by In-Q-Tel, which, yeah, is a CIA front company. That's the financial wing of the CIA for internal investment. The external wing was U.S. aid. Thankfully, that got mostly shelved. But these people are all in cahoots together. It doesn't matter what their tribe or political party is. They just want to subvert our rights for more domination and control over us. And they can exploit this to their benefit and seize our rights. It's a serious affront to liberty, and it's getting seriously ignored.
Called Gilead, which is... worthy of scrutiny as well. And I have some writing about that, or
what is it?
And more information about that in my book. It labels people as, there's a label, you can label someone as a subversive in the Palantir system, and it collects essentially everything about you. And so currently it's being used to target and classify immigrants for deportation, but it has those same capabilities. They could be used against, actual American citizens domestically if the war on domestic terror was ever to begin in earnest. And so I find it an immensely concerning company. Particularly its interest in predictive policing and pre-crime, which it was one of the earliest piloters of predictive policing. I believe they started in New Orleans. And there's also the fact that, the co-founder of Palantir, Peter Thiel, was relatively dishonest, I would argue, about his meetings with Jeffrey Epstein. He was trying to get, he was involved in funding a company that also has pre-crime capabilities that was championed by Ehud Barak and Epstein. Epstein put a lot of money into it. It's called Carbine. And there were newly released emails showed that they were all sort of talking to each other about Thiel investing directly in Carbine, and Thiel invested. I think one of his venture capital firms received a significant amount of money from Epstein, and he had not been very upfront about that.
Of course, yeah, Peter Thiel had a much closer connection than Epstein than he alleged. And by the way, Palantir's advisors included Condoleezza Rice and George Tenet, remember, the CIA director during the whole Iraq war fiasco. And he said, "I wish we had a tool of its power before 9/11. Our good friend David Petraeus, also a sheer lunatic and, murder supporter, Al-Qaeda supporter, sitting down next to al-Shara recently, the current leader of Syria, and just praising him, heaping praises upon this Al-Qaeda fighter who founded al-Nusra, which was the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria. He's saying that, this is an incredible company and Karp is sheer brilliant. That's the CEO. So this is just ludicrous how many well-connected people are supporting this nonsense for how little coverage it gets. So I thank Whitney for this.
Until, relatively recently. So I think, that company too, Carbine, it has creeped into a variety of counties across the U.S., taking over the 911 emergency call systems. And if Congress is to pass legislation that would federalize the 911 system, make it an all-national system, which there is a push to do, Carbine has been the top lobbying firm for that. But they have a pre-crime component where if you, they call it the C records component, but you can't find it on their website anymore after there were reports on it. But essentially, it would comb all of the data off of your smartphone and use it, put it into its pre-crime analytics to determine if you might be calling 911 again in the future or be the reason 911 is called. And that eventually streetlights in smart cities would call 911 for you on their own.
Yeah, so if you think that NSA and the DHS and mass surveillance schemes and the TSA, like I guess I said that, if you think that violates the Fourth Amendment and your protection of your privacy, your person, houses, things, and effects, you know, Palantir will just blow that all out of the water through its mass data collection, aggregation of a centralized database based on transactions and communications and travel. That's why they want all transactions to not be in cash, by the way. Cash is going away basically everywhere. There's a big push for that just about everywhere. In addition to these pre-crime schemes, there's so little good reporting on this. But thankfully, Whitney Webb and the Free State Project, which we just covered, you know, this awesome James Corbett article, we do have some information on it. This needs to get in the press. This needs to get more coverage. J.D. Vance, if he runs for president, which I think basically everyone thinks he will, needs to have his feet held to the fire on all this nonsense and Trump's connections with Thiel, and the fact that it seems to be connected with basically everything around, you know, AI weapons and pre-crime and mass surveillance and centralized bulk aggregation. All this stuff is a serious threat to liberty. It can't take hold, and Whitney was so right about setting the precedent, weaponizing it against your opponents, and then that undoubtedly, inevitably coming back to harm you. I think we had that in the War on Terror. I think we had that after 9/11, you know, targeting the terrorists, but then using and leveraging that same technology to go against dissidents in the United States. That is what is going to unfold under this thing. So thank you, Whitney. Great interview. Great to have Glenn Beck interview her. That kind of surprised me a little bit. Apparently he had talked to her before too, but this was excellent. I do want to hear what you guys have to say. Is Palantir one of the most serious threats to our liberty, to our rights right now? Let me know in the comments below. And why does it go so ignored by the media? Let me know in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Glenn Beck. Thank you, Glenn. Awesome interview. If you like my commentary or videos like this, please consider becoming a member. You can do that by clicking the join button below, which will help support the channel. That'd mean the world to me, and I'd really appreciate that. And in return for that, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.